Hello again, I hope you're doing well. This is going to be an introduction to Chapter 8 in the online textbook. So this is going to be talking about the parts of an atom and where the electrons are residing. The shape of the orbital is the shape of the place that they want to stay. So that's called an orbital, their shape. And each electron lives in a particular place. It's like having your street address. You have a particular address where you live. And so this is very similar to that. The electrons can be, we can tell you where exactly they are in relation to the nucleus. So that's called an orbital. So you can read the opening essay as usual, and then we know how electrons are within the atom because we do experiments with light. So if you would read the information about light and frequency, there's going to be a couple of homework problems on this relationship. See if I can find it for you guys. Of the wavelength and the frequency, and we're going to use Planck's constant. So you're going to be using this information in the beginning of this chapter to do the homework that you'll have at the end of this chapter. And so these example problems will help you a lot with that homework. So please take a look at that and make sure you understand how they work. So light waves can have a wave-like nature, and they can also have a packet-like nature, and that's called a photon. And different light waves have different frequencies, and so that's part of the electromagnetic spectrum, the visible light that we can see, and other energies have different wavelengths as well. So take a look at the electromagnetic spectrum, and here's the visible area, and then we have other things that have different frequencies and wavelengths. So look at that so you get the idea of where visible light is. The things that we're most used to are here, and then we have radioactivity, which is up in this region. So take a look at that so you kind of get the idea of where visible light is. And electrons can give off that different electromagnetic spectrum based on how they move within an atom. So we're going to be, they use that information to do some experiments to figure out where the electrons are in the atom. So this is hydrogen is the smallest atom, the most simple atom, and based on the experiments they did with hydrogen, they were able to figure out where the electrons were located in comparison to where the nucleus is. So take a look at that. We call these places where they are the quantum numbers, and so electrons can be very close to the nucleus or they can be farther out. Each level is an orbit, and one theory way back in the day was Bohr, who came up with a very simple theory, but now we have a more complex idea than Bohr, and we're going to explain in more detail where electrons are compared to what Bohr thought. You'll need to know what these quantum numbers are, so please read this section really, really carefully from here on, because we're going to be using these quantum numbers and all those things a lot. So make sure you understand this part right here, and then practice it with some with the practice problems they have. So electrons can live within these shapes. They move around a lot, but they stay within these probabilities areas. So this is an S. These are called p orbitals. These are Ds, and they get even more complicated than that. So read through this carefully so you get the idea. And we'll use that in class. It's very important. And then these arrangements of the atoms also relate to how things are on the periodic table. So that's called periodic trends. So that's also a very important section here. So they're going to explain how electrons are organized here. And that's called the electron configuration. So we have to be able to get used to writing the electrons and where they live. This is like their address. So we need to figure out how to do electrons, a boron's address with all the electrons shown where they live. So we'll get used to that in class. So this is telling you, this chart is important, but I'm going to give you one that might be a little bit easier to follow, but it tells you where the electrons are based on the energy that they have. And so we're going to learn electron configuration and also how to do something called abbreviated. I tell you that chemists like to do things in shorthand, so this is a shorthand way of showing where the electrons are living, the address of lithium's atoms, the lithium atom and its electrons. So that's called a noble gas configuration. So we'll learn how to do that. And then this is important. Where the atoms are on the periodic table, the elements where they are on the table, is based on their electron configurations, the way where the electrons live. So everything in this group has a very similar structure, and we'll talk about that. And it's very important. So get an idea of this. This part of the book's really important, so make sure you read through this. This chart is very important to know, so understand this. And then we're going to talk about periodic trends, I think, is next. And so where the electrons are, so periodic trends is a very important conceptual part of this chapter. It's based on where the electrons live and how they're set on the periodic table. So that's called the periodic trend, about how the periodic table is arranged. So make sure you understand each one of these definitions, and then how the periodic tables affect where the elements are on the periodic table, how it affects the radius. So radius is the size. As you notice, these little guys are small, and then as you go down the chart, it gets bigger. So we'll talk about why that is. That's called the periodic trend, about the radius, which is the size of an atom. There's ionization energy, will be the next thing we'll talk about. And then electron affinity, and we'll describe all this together and what the trend is. So we need to know what the trend means, and then what happens on the periodic table. So you can make predictions knowing those trends. And here's the homework. So this is the Chapter 8 homework. So you'll be doing this homework, and remember that the answer key has the odds at the very end. So good luck, and I hope you enjoy Chapter 8.